This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This show was recorded on January 19th, 2020, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, you boys?
But not as usual, we have a special guest today, Dr. Cheryl Harasymchuk, who's an associate professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, where I live, in the Department of Psychology. She's been there for 10 years, and she teaches courses on close relationships and runs the Positive Activities and Intimate Relationships Lab at Carleton. She's going to talk to us today about relationships, love, attractiveness, and how to make them better. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So let's just get right into it. What are close relationships, and close compared to what?
Well, close relationships are defined as frequent interactions between two people that last over a considerable period of time, that involve mutual influence and a high level of disclosure, such as a best friend. A special type of close relationship is an intimate relationship, which has everything that is contained in a close relationship plus the sexual passion component. For instance, a romantic partner. And close relationships can be contrasted with impersonal relationships that tend to be more formal, task-oriented, and determined by social rules. So things like relationships like prisoner and guard, barista and regular customer. Also, they can be compared to acquaintances that involve less disclosure and might be more limited to specific situations, such as my soccer friend.
So your best friend could be a close relationship, your romantic partner, I guess assuming you have a child, or just anyone you're really close to and share a lot with. That's what I'm understanding?
Correct.
Great. Okay, so before we start exploring your work and close relationships in detail, what are the broader ideas you want to communicate? What are you hoping to teach our listeners today?
Well, first, specific to my research, I want to emphasize the importance of play and leisure with romantic partners on a day-to-day basis in increasing relationship quality and fending off relational boredom. The central elements of a satisfying relationship are not just security, familiarity, comfort, and a shoulder to cry on. Other central elements include play, exploration, and having fun. But second, more broadly, I want to help teach the public that there are scientists that study close relationships, like friendships and romantic relationships, in terms of how they begin, how they're maintained and end, as well as how they impact our health and well-being. In other words, there are people that make a living using the scientific method to uncover the mysteries of companionship and love.
Hooray for science.
Yeah.
And just to clarify what you mean by the word play, I assume you don't quite mean the BDSM kink understanding the word play. You might just mean fun activities.
Correct. Activities with your partner or a friend that involve fun, exploration, and discovery. Activities like going for a hike, going salsa dancing, or maybe doing an escape room adventure.
Cool.
So something novel, something new is really a
Correct.
key thing here. Okay.
Well, I'm guessing the majority of our listeners are in some sort of relationship with someone, even if it's only us in your podcast feed. So they can probably understand there is some value in understanding more about them. But for those not convinced, including all our hermit listeners who only listen to us through our podcast, why is this important to study?
Well, relationships are worth studying, not simply because they're an integral part of our lives, but also because there is mounting evidence that relationships are beneficial for our health and well-being. Feeling lonely is a huge detriment to people's well-being. And second, in the context of romantic love, it fades. Romantic love is a reward that has been referred to by some scholars as a cocaine high. Like most rewards, habituation sets in, and it takes more and more to maintain the same levels of rewards. And while I don't think people want to experience the highly intense, distracting love that they experience in the beginning for the entirety of the relationship, like how would you get anything done? I do think many people want to keep some of those feelings alive.
That sounds very plausible. I think if you ask someone, they would be honest and say what you just said, that they wouldn't want it because it is too distracting. But in the moment, they definitely want it. And that's often why sometimes people jump from one thing to the next.
Yeah, for sure.
So what is your area of research and what questions drive you and your work?
Well, broadly, I'm interested in the question, what contributes to relationship satisfaction in established relationships? How do couples fend off boredom in these established relationships? And specific to my program of research, I have a few specific questions that I've been working on lately. First, are daily instances of couple play/leisure time activities associated with increased relationship satisfaction and decreased relational boredom? Second, do some people have a proclivity and desire to plan and engage in these forms of play more than others? Third, what challenges do couples face in implementing play in their relationships? I'm about to embark on a project with the question, can play and discovery outside of the relationship, for instance, something done without your partner like a hobby or a passion, can this improve your relationship as well?
Interesting questions. Of course, just asking questions isn't enough. This isn't philosophy. Ha! I kid out of love. But seriously, how do you go about answering these questions? Because as a scientist, that's what you have to do.
I'm answering my questions in a few ways. One way is by asking established couples from the community to answer daily questions about their experiences in their relationship over a 3-week period. And then I follow up with them several months later. And in other designs, I ask people in established relationships to plan dates, and I ask them questions about it. I also follow up with them and ask them about their experiences after the date.
Okay, so a couple quick clarifying questions. When you say established relationship, is there a certain period of time that inmeans?
There isn't an exact time, but what we're really looking to do is get past the honeymoon phase. We're really interested in people that are past the initial 2 years of their relationship, but we leave it open. And so in our studies and past ones, we've recruited people that have been in a relationship for a minimum of, I think it was 1 year for one study. We left it a little bit more open, that one. And then we get people that are participate in our study that have been in the relationship for 40 years. So we get a wide range. And on average, the people in our studies have been in a relationship for about 10 years. So the reason for this is we want there to be enough time for potential boredom to set in and for people to be more likely to be experiencing these challenges.
That's very reasonable. And then when you say you're having people answer daily questions, is there like a survey they're filling out? Is there an app? What process?
What we've been using is an online survey, and they complete it at the end of each day, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to do. Mm-hmm. In the future, though, I'd like to incorporate apps in my study with using people's smartphones so that we don't just have to rely on them completing it at the end of the day. We can contact them at random parts of the day and get reports closer to when the experiences are occurring rather than the reflection at the end.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, that gets a bit more of the experienced self versus remembered self, even though the timeline is very short.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, so before we get to what you found, are there studies in the field that have impacted you or really stand out that's inspired you to do this work in the first place?
Well, there was one study, and this is when I was an undergrad, and I was just dazzled by it. So in the context of play, one key study for me was one done by a researcher named Arthur Aaron and his colleagues, and it was published in 2000. And what they did is they invited established couples, one couple at a time, to come to a gymnasium to participate in an activity together. And they had several types of activities. One was routine and one was more exciting. And the exciting one involved the couple, carrying a cylindrical foam roller through an obstacle course while being Velcroed at their feet and ankles. And they're also given the instructions that they're not allowed to use their hands. And they have to make it through the obstacle course with this foam roller in a timely manner. And what was interesting to me is that up until that point, all I had heard about or read about was about couples working through conflict. And so this was one of the first and important studies that looked at couples having fun and playing together.
Like the positive psychology movement related to relationships.
Correct. Right. The positive psychology movement had a big impact on my area of study, and that came right around 2000 as well. So this was right there at the beginning. And then methodologically speaking, tracking couples on a daily basis and over longer periods of time was another important advance in the field. For instance, in one study by Ted Houston and colleagues, researchers tracked newlywed couples for the first 13 years of marriage. And what this allowed the researchers to do is to assess couples over longer periods of time in a more natural setting. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to observe how relationship satisfaction changes over time based on the amount of negative and positive experiences and emotions they had. And in one study, they found that the level of negativity was less of a role in determining whether the couple remained together, but more so that it was a level of positivity that was indicative of whether people remained happy and together.
Interesting. So it's like the net effect is what is more important than just whether it's negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
13 years is also a long time. Hooray for longitudinal studies.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what have you found in your research?
Well, in my research, in my daily diary study where I track people on a daily basis, I've found that on days when people play together by engaging in an exciting activity, they and their partners report greater relationship satisfaction and lower boredom that day. We've also found that some people are better at adding effective play to their relationship. For instance, people with something called a high approach relationship goals. That is, people that want to seek fun and positivity rather than avoiding negativity. They plan and engage in more novel and exciting activities with their partner, and these activities also happen to be more creative. And not only do these people have a greater proclivity to generate ideas and implement them, they're also better at selecting activities that their partner wants to engage in. So the important thing here is that something that they both enjoy, not just something that's novel and exciting to one partner and not the other.
You mean watching someone bowl isn't fun?
Maybe they're really good.
And another part of my research, another thing I found, is that one of the challenges knowing when to add play to the relationship. In other words, you can't have play all the time, right? There are many other important things that you need in a relationship.
Life is serious business.
And so one thing I've explored is whether people that are bored on a day-to-day basis, whether this prompts them to play more. That is, whether it has a constructive purpose. So when you are low in the tank for play and excitement, is it the case that people will be motivated to engage in more exciting activities with their partner? So far, the evidence is mixed. People know they should do exciting things when bored, but generally don't engage in them more when bored. Instead, when things are going well, this might be the better time to build on the positivity with more excitement. And so more needs to be studied here. But the initial findings suggest that it is important to be proactive and responsive to partners' needs rather than waiting to react when things are not going well. So this is a case where you might get some forced Friday date nights that are not as successful as you'd like them to be.
Forced Friday date nights already sound not great.
Oh, is it Friday?
End of the week. I just want to relax. I guess we're going out, dear. So you've touched on something which I don't know if you can address, but this pithy phrase, something like only boring people get bored. And that sounds like it's mixed in terms of what the evidence is. I also wondered in your research, these somewhat, we'll say natural experiments, meaning some people are just more likely to involve play. You're not actually engaging in play sessions to then have a different type of study where you're injecting a play session, we'll say, into a couple and then seeing how it affects them. If they weren't like to play as more, would affect them more. You know what I'm trying to get at?
I think so. So I think there's 2 points there. The first is that, yes, we believe that there's individual differences in the extent to which you can add play and reduce boredom. But here's the interesting thing. It's about the expectations that you set for yourself and what you want in the relationship. So if you're a boring person, maybe you've set the bar low. Maybe just watching a different type of movie on Netflix, that will be novel enough for you. Yeah. So there are differences there. And getting at the second point, there are studies, there's not that many of them, but there are studies that do, in terms of an experiment, give couples homework to do. And they take this homework home for a month or so. And what they do is they tell some couples to engage in something new and exciting, and they give them a certain amount of time to try this in a week. And then for the other couples, they give them advice to, spend time together, pleasant, comforting, that sort of thing. And at least the initial evidence is that with these homework studies is that people that engage in the play, the novel and exciting work, that they experience some boosts in relationship satisfaction compared to the people that were still spending time with their partner, but it had a different quality.
All right. Well, this is good in theory, but what about practice? Meaning, is there any applicability to the real world settings for people in relationships?
Sure. I feel a little uncomfortable answering questions like that, but people want to know. So I will make an effort to share this. So my findings combined with other related research in my area suggest that play can be applied to the real world setting. And what I mean by that is play can be useful for people's everyday lives. And I'd like to preface that it is relatively new research area, and so there are many details and processes to sort out. But essentially, the implications of my work are that couples who play together will be happier. So some advice that I could potentially give, not very novel, rather than stick to your routine of staying in to watch TV with your partner, try to find a new activity that allows you to interact, have fun, and explore, and discover something new about each other. And so this might be something that is less comfortable. It might require more effort, and you might not want to do it in the beginning, but after, the idea is that you'll have greater benefits in the long run for your relationship.
I was even thinking about the situation where if you try something like an escape room and you don't really enjoy it, if you have the right perspective, your normal life will seem better. If you try to really plan for a successful date and it goes badly, that can be perceived negatively. But if you're like, oh, gee, this reminds us why we don't do things, and that's pretty good because what we have is watching Netflix, which is good for us.
The key thing is, for what we know so far, is that it's important that both people enjoy it. But what we don't know so much is how much discomfort is okay for you to still have these benefits.
That's true. And when you said people are happier, it's a question I know is hard to answer. Is there any sense of how much happier? Is it a 5% difference, a 20% difference?
Oh, yeah. In these studies, the effect sizes are relatively small because we are not manipulating things to a great extent. So if we're tracking day-to-day fluctuations in play and their impact on relationship satisfaction, we are comparing it to the own person's amount of relationship satisfaction. So we just observe these little amounts. But the idea here is that over time, these small effects accumulate and have significant consequences. And so the idea here could be is that you're happier and you're more likely to stay together if you're doing these little small things on a daily basis. When it comes to the homework studies where they give people some instructions to do something novel and arousing and exciting with their partner, we've only tracked people over relatively short periods of time, 3 weeks, a month. It would be really nice if, you could set aside a year for something like this. More broadly, if you're getting at the idea of how much play impacts relationship functioning in comparison to all the other good things people need to do in their relationship and all the bad things they need to avoid, that we don't know. We don't have a specific formula is what I mean. So here's what we do know. Removing really bad things from the relationship, such as name-calling, criticism, infidelity, these have relatively big effects on the relationship. However, for most couples that stay together, they don't find things that are really wrong in the relationship, right? They might just find that things are not right with it. And so I believe there's value to studying the small things that people do on a daily basis to make their relationship feel right.
So it's sort of the difference between, do you want your relationship to just continue to exist, or do you want it to be, to flourish and to really be a positive experience for everyone's life, right?
That's correct. And so nowadays, at least in North American culture, people have high expectations for the relationship. They're not just content just to get by, survive, and have a marriage or a long-term relationship. They want to strive to be the best possible self, and they want their partner to help them reach those heights.
Now, adding children to a relationship certainly changes the dynamic and reduces the amount of time couples may spend together engaging in exciting activities. Would such activities, which are engaged in together as a family, be likely to have a similar benefit than just the one-on-one setting?
Well, great question. Let me first say that I'm not familiar with family dynamic research. I just focus on dyads. However, I would expect family play experiences could help, given that it allows the couples to interact and explore together, and also observe their kids having fun and discovering. That being said, the quality of the play might be different when done as a family versus done as a couple. For instance, you might have a persona when you're with your children, where you have to be responsible, right? You're the dad, and so this might be a different self-identity than with your partner alone. And when you're with your partner alone, you might be able to let loose a little more than when you're with your kids.
It's hard to have fun at the pool if you're trying to make sure other people don't drown.
Yeah, that is a
It's a bit distracting.
responsibility. Yeah.
This is what lifeguards are for.
Now, do you have any tips on how couples can continue to have quality time and activities, potentially one-on-one, to keep their relationship going while there are time and attention demands which come with everyday parenthood?
Well, in some ways, I feel a little uncomfortable answering this question. It's similar to mansplaining in the sense that I don't have kids, and so I feel a bit weird giving advice to parents with kids on how to make their relationship better. But I will share some of the evidence that I know, and also from just hearing some of my friends that have kids and how they navigate this. So transitioning into parenthood is a challenging time for couples. Just making it through the day is an accomplishment. So the thought of carving out time and doing something that requires an expenditure of energy for frivolous seeming play activities might be the last thing on a new parent's mind. So here are a few tips for new parents. So first, adjust your expectations. As wonderful as having a child is, new parents are likely sleep deprived and facing a constant series of challenges. Like, can I take a shower today?
What's your play activity hygiene?
for this tough period of time, give yourself a break. Give your relationship a break and realize you won't have the luxury of playtime with your partner like you used to.
Yeah.
Second, play is a broad term and means many different things to different people. So the important part is that people involved in the relationship find it fun and interactive. And rather than having one big event like a date night, like going salsa dancing, people could try to add playful moments into the day as they are navigating the challenges. So it's more about the attitude that is important than what big event that you are doing.
So instead of going out for salsa dancing, just eat some salsa. You have to manage your expectations.
Well, that seems more feasible, actually.
Yeah, dance that chip into your mouth.
Picante, it really does spice up the relationship.
And then here's another one that I read about. If you have the luxury of being able to access childcare, it might be nice to plan some couple-only time, like really make an effort to set that aside. And here, don't worry about it being super exciting activity like the activities used to be. It might just be novel enough for you because you've had a different lifestyle for a while. Mm-hmm. So, as an example, it might just be novel to have a glass of wine or go to the bathroom on your own.
That sounds about right.
Really selling relationships with kids.
So these sound like very exciting things. Shower? Like 15 minutes and no one's banging on the shower door? That's amazing. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Enlightenment. Well, we know humans have been probably talking about relationships since they could talk, and especially about other people's relationships. So I want to hear your thoughts about the field of relationship science more broadly. Do you have any sense of when it began? Yeah,
it began in the 1960s, so it's been around for 60 years, which is not a long time for a new science. And it began with a focus on studying attraction and what draws strangers together in the lab. And an interesting tidbit here, arguably, one can say that a psychologist who studied learning and cognition with monkeys in the 1950s, named Harry Harlow, who ironically deprived monkeys of affectionate touch and love, called psychologists to action in his 1958 APA, that is American Psychological Association, presidential address to study love. So he made the point of saying to everybody at his presidential address that shame on you, essentially, psychologists. This is a vital part of people's everyday life, and this is something that you should study. And it seemed interesting that people started to study it shortly after. And as a side note, relationship scientists have faced an uphill battle from the beginning in terms of getting funding for their research and being taken seriously. One interesting fact is that one of the first studies to receive funding from NSF was roasted with an infamous award called the Golden Fleece Award, which is essentially an award created. It's an award you don't want to get. And it's created by a senator and meant to recognize a waste of taxpayers' money.
Ouch. Yeah. Unlike the visual cognition studies, which really apply to everyone's lives. Mm-hmm.
And he said, when he gave them the award, that not only does he think it's a waste of taxpayers' money, but also that he doesn't want to understand the mysteries of love, and he doesn't think that anybody else wants to understand the mysteries. He just feels like this is one of those things that should be left alone.
Oh, boy.
But there was that call to action. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. I guess it answers its own question. Well, if stand-up comedy has taught me anything, it's about timing. Actually, it's that men and women are different and experience relationships differently. That's the bulk of, I think, of what a lot of people talk about up there. Sure. What does the science say?
Well, the idea that men and women have completely different experiences in relationship is a myth.
What?
Albeit a myth that I don't mind occasionally hearing comedians perpetuate. And the popular best-selling book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, didn't help stop this myth, right? This was a book that was published in 1992. And it's a good story. It's a nice catch-all for describing why relationships, at least heterosexual ones, are so challenging. And so to be fair, the science, it says that there are some gender differences in relationships. One of the more consistent one is that men have higher sex drive. However, the key point is that differences are not as large as people might think. And certainly not so large to suggest that men and women are different species.
Otherwise, it's hard to have those kids.
That would save some relationships, maybe.
The reality is that there are more differences within a gender than there are between genders. That is, men and women are more similar than different when it comes to love and relationships. And that is the point that I would like for people to keep in mind.
Well, if you're in a relationship now, that means your relationship has lasted, but also in the past you were drawn to someone in the first place. So can you talk to us a bit about both of these topics, starting with what draws people together? And I've always been curious, do opposites attract?
Yeah.
I think they don't, but let's hear what the science says. Or they might temporarily.
Yeah.
Well, in the context of love connections, people have increased chance of being drawn together and falling in love if they are closer in proximity. That is, they work together, they live near each other, they're in the same class. If they have positive personalities, it's kind of a no-brainer. So, like, if you're a warm-hearted person, you have a good sense of humor, people like to be around you more. If they find each other physically attractive. And also if they are similar. That is, if you have a similar upbringing, same political values, same world beliefs. So to answer your question, sometimes people with different traits are attracted to one another. But the evidence suggests that more often what is happening is that similar people are drawn together. And so I think the opposites attract saying is so popular because that is what people tend to notice and they give it more weight.
Wow.
Like they might just focus on the fact that one of the partners is more outgoing than the other and then just go ahead and say that, oh, opposites attract. But what people might be taking for granted, for instance, is that maybe they are close in age. Maybe they have the same worldviews. Maybe they laugh at the same jokes and so on.
Yeah.
Cheryl, one of the points you mentioned was people end up together if they have positive personalities. So if someone has more of a negative personality, meaning they're less warm, they don't have much of a sense of humor, do they end up with someone who was also that way?
Well, one of the consistent findings that we as relationship scientists have encountered is the idea that people with a certain negative personality, referred to as being like high in neuroticism, that is, the people that focus on negativity, that they have a difficulty getting into relationships and staying in relationships. And so with similarity, you might extrapolate that, if you both have negative personalities, that you could be drawn together. But there are additional challenges that come along with that, and that might just less likely to be in the relationship in the first place.
Right. It's probably less likely to succeed overall if you both have a trait, which makes it less likely to have any relationship to succeed.
Yeah, it's really helpful when there is a partner that is warm and conveys a lot of trust and security. This can help bring out some of the positive traits from the person that normally would score high in neuroticism.
Right. We can't both be avoidant. We'll never meet. So according to science, what makes someone physically attractive? Because we know that's a huge component of why people are in romantic relationships.
Or at least how they get started. So there's a weird science of beauty out there. And the people that study this divide it up into facial attractiveness and body attractiveness. For facial attractiveness, women are more attractive if they have baby-faced features. For instance, small chin, large eyes, full lips. Women are considered beautiful when they have baby-faced features plus signs of maturity, such as prominent cheekbones and a broad smile. And more generally, good-looking faces tend to be averaged. And what I mean by that is not that the person is just average-looking. What I mean is that good-looking person has an averaged face, and these averaged faces tend to be more symmetrical. That is, both sides of the face are aligned. That is, they look like everybody else or a composite of everybody else.
Interesting.
And women's body attractiveness is particularly influenced by body mass index, or BMI. As well, there is a lot of research to suggest that the waist-to-hip ratio is an important factor, at least with North American cultures. And the most attractive waist-to-hip ratio for a woman is a waist that is 30% smaller than the hips. And so what low waist-to-hip ratio and weight, what these are indicators of physical health and reproductive value, at least from an evolutionary perspective. And in other words, they indicate suitable youth.
Now, you mentioned North American standards. Now, I know there is a certain change in beauty standards throughout time and throughout the world, and there are probably some consistencies too. But are there a lot of changes right now in different sides of the planet that look for different aspects? Is that a big thing? Yeah.
So I just want to say that a lot of this research has been widely replicated, but not universally so.
Sure.
So there's less research that examines it in cultures that are not Western.
Okay.
So what has changed over the years is the body mass index. So people have gotten what is more desirable is people that are thinner.
Yeah.
But having a small waist, that hasn't changed. Perhaps there is more of a focus on the derriere.
Yeah, sure.
But the small waist is something that hasn't changed over the years.
Interesting.
And I happen to read something online because Cheryl and I were talking about this. Well, 0.7 might be the current preference for Western cultures. In Asian cultures, it might be 0.6. And then in Cameroon, it might be 0.8. Okay. So there is some variability there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting.
So aside from women, researchers also do research on men's body attractiveness. And here some of the key factors include height, so taller the better, to a certain extent. Shoulder to waist ratio. So this is the Dorito chip shaped type of body with the inverted triangle.
If only you could look like a Dorito if you ate Doritos.
and musculature. So according to the evolutionary perspective, a desirable body shape for men are related to dominance, strength, and the ability to protect.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. So if you are attractive and then you find a good relationship and you want to make it last, what does a loving, happy relationship look like? And how do you make it last?
So love can take several forms in relationships, and not all forms need to be expressed at all times for the relationship to be considered happy. So here are some of the different ways to think about love. There's romantic love. This one often comes to mind. So this is passion combined with sexual desire and attraction, intense emotions. Then there is a type of love that is referred to as companionate type. This is friendship love. You enjoy spending time together. Then there's compassionate love, which is also referred to as altruistic love and involves self-sacrifice. And finally, there is this type of love called attachment love, and it's the desire to be attached to a person for protection or the good of oneself. And it's associated with proximity to the partner and felt security.
Does love last?
Ooh, good question. So when relationship scientists track couples over long periods of time, so I'm not talking about a few weeks here, I'm talking about years, decades, what they notice is that on average, there is a decline. So love does fade when you are making generalizations to an entire group of people. But there's a few things to keep in mind. This likely applies for some types of love, for instance, romantic love more than the others, like companionate or compassionate. And second, these are average declines, and thus some couples experience more declines than others. And this is why I am studying what I'm studying. If it inevitably declined, what would be the point of me looking for ways to increase it? So I just want to find things there to buffer this decline.
Right, like anything, it can't be uniform, otherwise there's not really much to study.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are the challenges people face in maintaining a happy relationship?
So beginning in the 1980s, researchers started to devote a considerable amount of time to understanding why some couples are happy and why some couples are unhappy. That is, what contributes to relationship decline and divorce. And so more broadly, researchers have looked at enduring vulnerabilities, so things like neuroticism and other negative personality traits, childhood experiences. So in other words, this is some of the baggage that you bring into the relationship, as well as external stressors like health, finances, work, family, all these unexpected things that pop up. Two of the main challenges that I've focused on in my research are conflict and boredom.
Well, then tell us about both. And do they interact?
So conflict. So for instance, when people spend so much time together and live together, it is inevitable that there will be opposing goals or different viewpoints.
Like the sound of your spoon against the bowl in the morning. God!
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, or things like, who should take out the garbage, or which in-laws they should visit at the holidays, or should they put the bonus check in the bank for the future or go on an exotic vacation, right? There's an endless amount of opposing goals that occur on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So with conflict, the main trick is to de-escalate the conflict and the expression of negativity, not to avoid it entirely, just to de-escalate it. For instance, try to accept responsibility, paraphrase the other's argument, use self-disclosures with I statements versus you always do this, add approval and affection, and maybe even add some friendly humor to lighten the mood. For instance, when a partner behaves destructively, for instance, yelling at you for tripping over the clothes you left on the floor, inhibit the impulse to respond similarly, like yelling back, "You're such a klutz," and instead respond constructively with something like, "My bad, honey boo." So aside from conflict, another challenge that I focused on for my PhD thesis is relational boredom. So after extended periods of time with a person, things that were once rewarding start to lose their rewarding oomph. That is, we become habituated to the rewards and need more and more to keep up the satisfaction and the excitement that we had. So unlike conflict that relates to expressions of negativity, boredom relates to diminished positivity and rewards. So the relationship doesn't feel as exciting, it lacks that spark that it once had, it feels effortful to spend time with the person, and people might find they want to spend time away from their partner. So if you think of your relationship as a plant, when you're bored, it feels like it's no longer growing. So the main trick to dealing with this challenge is to proactively introduce growth in the relationship by engaging in exciting activities with your partner. For instance, go for a hike, watch an interesting documentary, take a day trip together. In other words, playing together. In my latest research, I'll be looking at how the growth that each partner experiences on their own time, that is, away from their partner when they're doing personal hobbies, work, and other passions, how this shapes relationship quality. Mm-hmm. Perhaps allowing your partner to see you in a new light, perhaps having your partner teach you something new. And in terms of how they both relate, this is something I have looked at a bit. I have looked at how they co-occur. And what I found is that people that report more boredom also report more arguments. And based on how I've studied boredom and conflict so far, it is not clear if people are fighting about what types of play activities to engage in, are fighting to add a little spark to their bored relationship,
Interesting.
Right? Or whether their relationship is not meeting their expectations in general. This is something I'd like to look into further.
Well, we love to provide listeners with practical information that they can use to improve their lives instead of just annoying their friends with myth-busting. So do you happen to have any science-based quick tips for people to increase happiness in their relationships?
Sure. There are some quick hacks, and they fall into two camps: reducing weaknesses and enhancing strengths. And they don't cost much money, and they don't take much time. For reducing weaknesses, the general theme is to reinterpret the situation. So, for instance, reinterpret your partner's negative behavior as something that is temporary and not something that is ongoing. So if your partner comes home from work and yells at you to why didn't you take out the garbage as soon as they come in, perhaps you could reinterpret it as, might be their first day of working on a new project, or maybe they're hangry.
Yeah.
Or you could reappraise the conflict. So you could imagine you were a third party observing your argument. Or you could adopt a growth mindset. So you could acknowledge that happy relationships need to be worked at. Aside from reducing weaknesses, it's important to add strengths, or enhance them rather. And this is what I am focusing on, or my general area. So you could add some more gratitude. So just because you're in a long-term relationship doesn't mean that nice gestures should be taken for granted. Make a point of meaningfully thanking your partner if they've done a thoughtful gesture for you. So, for instance, bringing your favorite coffee drink while you're working hard on a project, or driving you to the airport. Another one is sharing good news with your partner and celebrating it together. So it's on you to share this good news, and it's also on your partner to respond similarly. So it's important for that partner to respond in an enthusiastic and positive way. So if your partner texts you some good news, like they got a promotion, respond right away, preferably with a few emojis.
Nice.
And then another one is affectionate touch. And so here it's not just about the big acts related to intimacy, such as sex. It can be small gestures, such as a hand on the back, holding hand. All of this conveys responsiveness and caring.
Well, thank you so much for an interesting interview, Cheryl.
Thanks so much for having me.
If people want to learn more about you, should they find your Positive Activities and Intimate Relationships Lab?
That's right. You can find more information about my research and what I'm up to on the Positive Activities for Intimate Relationships Lab at Carleton University.
We'll put a link in the show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.